E.N.D here. The Lost Caverns of Ixalan gave us a new mechanic ideal to sink into the deep secrets of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Descend. Descend is a mechanic, as said, introduced in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Descending is the act of putting a permanent card into a graveyard from anywhere, making it a mechanic along with the lines of Morbid and Revolt. In all cases, descending refers to permanent cards only, so instants and sorcery cards don't count. Descended. Some cards in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan have abilities that check if you descended this turn. You've descended if a permanent card has been put into your graveyard from anywhere. For abilities that trigger if you descended, it doesn't matter how many times you've descended that turn, only that you've done so at least once. It also doesn't matter that the permanent card is still in your graveyard. If a permanent card is put into your graveyard and then you return it to your hand, you've descended that turn. Descend 4 and Descend 8. Descend 4 and Descend 8 abilities care about there being at least 4 or 8 permanent cards in your graveyard respectively. Again, instant and sorcery cards don't count. Each Descend 4 and Descend 8 ability is different, and the bonus for achieving the desired haul in your graveyard changes from card to card. In this way, these are similar to Threshold or Delirium. Fathomless Descent. Fathomless Descent abilities are very similar to Descend 4 or Descend 8, but rather than specifying a required minimum number of permanent cards in your graveyard, they just get more powerful the more you have. For this mechanic, the closest analog is Underground. But how do you play Descend? Let's build our battlefield, and let's say that this area is my graveyard. I'm going to put in my graveyard some cards. Let's put some cards in my graveyard. Let's put them there. I have a land, I have a sorcery, I have an instant, and I have 2 creatures. Now I'm going to cast Detect Echo. 4 and 1 blue, 3/2, enters the battlefield, draw a card. Descend 4 has flying as long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. Any card, any spell with Descend, it's a normal spell, therefore when casted, it will go on the stack. There can be a counter, there can be a response, nothing happens, and it will hit the battlefield. At this stage, my Detect Echo doesn't have flying, because in my graveyard I have only 3 permanents, the land and the 2 creatures. For Detect Hero to have flying, I need 4 permanents, Descend 4. Therefore, when the 4th permanent, and let's say I will sack my Sakura Tribe Elf there, when the 4th permanent will hit the graveyard, my Detect Echo will have flying. As long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in my graveyard, my Detect Echo will have flying. If a permanent leaves the graveyard and I have less than 4 permanents in my graveyard, Detect Echo will lose its flying. Second scenario, I'm going to cast the Ever-Flowing Well. 2 and 1 blue, legendary artifact, enters the battlefield, mill 2 cards, then draw 2 cards. Descend 8. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, transform it. As said, it's a normal spell, therefore, when casted, it will go on the stack. There can be a counter, there can be a response, nothing happens, and it will hit the battlefield. I will mill 2 cards. At this stage, at the beginning of my upkeep, Descend 8 will not trigger, as I have only 6 permanent cards in my graveyard. Don't forget that sorcery and instants don't count. Now, let's say I'm going to discard another 2 cards, and I'm going to discard 2 permanent cards. At the beginning of my upkeep, because I have 8 permanent cards in my graveyard, Descend 8 of the Ever-Flowing Well will trigger, and I will transform it into the Myrate Pulse. In this case, if a permanent leaves the graveyard and I have less than 8 permanents, I still have Myrate Pool. Myrate Pool will not transform back if I have less than 8 permanents in my graveyard. Some notes. As said, there are cards that have abilities that check if you've descended this turn. You've descended if a permanent card has been put into your graveyard from anywhere. For example, Brute Rage my code check to see if you descended that turn to determine whether its ability will trigger. In this case, it doesn't matter how many times you've descended that turn, only that you've done so at least once. In case of the Myco Tyrant, its ability counts how many times you've descended that turn, meaning how many permanent cards have been put into your graveyard from anywhere during the turn. Again, those cards need not still be in your graveyard. Fathomless Descent abilities are very similar to Descent, but rather than specifying a required minimum number of permanent cards in your graveyard, they just get more powerful the more you have. Remember that in all cases, Descending refers to permanent cards only, so instants and sorcery counts don't count. So, this is how you play Descent. Leave a comment below what do you think about this new mechanic that have synergy with your graveyard. And as always, subscribe to my channel for more and more interesting videos about Magic the Gathering and the collectible world.